In February 1995, the oldest merchant bank in Britain was sold for £1. £1 sterling. Not 1 billion. Not 1 million. £1, the price of a newspaper. The buyer got the building, the staff, the 233-year legacy, and approximately $1.3 billion in losses. All of it the work of a single 28-year-old man operating from an office in Singapore. Barings Bank was not some scrappy startup waiting to fail. Founded in 1762, it was older than the United States. It had financed the Napoleonic Wars. It had helped broker the Louisiana Purchase. Queen Elizabeth II held an account there. When people said Barings, they meant establishment, the kind of institution that felt permanent simply because it had always existed. By the early 1990s, Barings had expanded aggressively into derivatives trading across Asia. The strategy was modern. The oversight was not. Senior management in London understood the business of old money. They understood considerably less about futures contracts on the Nikkei 225 index. That gap between what they approved and what they understood is where the disaster grew. Nick Leeson joined Barings in 1989. He was sharp, ambitious, and excellent at the administrative mechanics of trading, the back-office work most ambitious bankers considered beneath them. He was sent to Jakarta to sort out a settlement mess. He did it, efficiently. This was taken as evidence of extraordinary talent. It was evidence he knew where the paperwork lived. In 1992, Barings sent Leeson to Singapore to run futures trading operations on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, known as SIMEX. He was given a rare dual role. He managed both the trading desk and the back office, the people responsible for checking the trading desk. This is what risk managers call a conflict of interest. Barings called it efficient. He was 25 years old and answerable in practical terms to almost no one. The London office was 9 time zones away and largely trusted his reports. His reports were excellent. They were also, in significant part, fictional. Shortly after arriving in Singapore, Leeson opened an error account number 88,888, ostensibly to correct minor trading mistakes. Error accounts are standard practice. What is not standard practice is using one to hide $2 million in losses from a single botched trade made by a junior colleague in his first week. Leeson hid it. He did not tell London. He decided he would simply trade his way back. This is the founding logic of almost every trading disaster in history, the belief that the next trade will fix the last one. It is not a strategy. It is a psychological trap with a $1.3 billion price tag, apparently. Through 1992 and into 1993, Leeson's official trades, the ones London could see, were generating extraordinary returns. He reported profits of roughly $10 million in 1993 alone, representing an estimated 10% of Barings' total annual profit. He was celebrated, praised in internal memos, given increasing autonomy. The word genius was reportedly used. Meanwhile, account 88,888 was hemorrhaging. By the end of 1992, the hidden losses were approximately $2 million. By the end of 1993, they were closer to $23 million. By the end of 1994, they had reached an estimated $208 million. The account London didn't know existed had become larger than most of the bank's visible operations. No one checked. No one asked the right questions. To be fair, no one was really sure what questions to ask. Leeson's strategy in the hidden account had evolved from covering a single error to making enormous speculative bets, primarily straddle positions on the Nikkei 225 index, essentially wagering that the Japanese market would remain stable. He needed calm markets. He needed them badly. Then on January 17, 1995, the Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe, Japan. The Nikkei dropped sharply. Leeson's positions, already catastrophically large, began to collapse. A rational actor stops here. Leeson doubled down. He began buying Nikkei futures in enormous quantities, reportedly tens of thousands of contracts, attempting to single-handedly prop up the Japanese market. He was one man with an unauthorized account trying to move an entire national stock index. The market was unmoved. To fund the mounting margin calls, the cash demands that come when losing positions deteriorate, Leeson had been requesting large sums from Barings London. He provided explanations. The explanations were accepted. Between January and February 1995, London wired him an estimated $835 million to cover what he described as client obligations. There were no clients. There was only account 88,888. On February 23, 1995, Leeson did not show up for work. He left a note on his desk that read simply, "I'm sorry." He and his wife had already left Singapore. Barings management, attempting to calculate the actual exposure for the first time, discovered that losses in the hidden account had reached approximately $1.3 billion, exceeding the bank's entire available capital. The Bank of England convened emergency meetings over the weekend. Potential buyers were contacted. The terms were assessed. Barings Bank, 233 years old, financier of empires and monarchs, was effectively insolvent. ING, the Dutch financial group, acquired it on February 26, 1995 for the symbolic sum of £1, assuming all liabilities. The staff kept their jobs. The shareholders received nothing. The board received a lesson they were somewhat late in learning. Leeson was arrested in Frankfurt attempting to return to Britain. He was extradited to Singapore, tried, and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for fraud and deceiving the bank's auditors. He served 4 years before being released on medical grounds after a diagnosis of colon cancer. He later wrote a memoir, gave lectures on risk management, and became, improbably, the CEO of an Irish football club. The arc of his career is its own kind of dark comedy. The subsequent inquiries, both internal and governmental, identified failures at nearly every level of Barings' management structure. The Bank of England's report was particularly direct. Leeson had operated without meaningful supervision. Warning signs had been present. An internal audit in 1994 had actually flagged his dual role as a risk, noting that it was an excessive concentration of powers. Management reviewed the finding. They did not act on it. The audit sat in a file. Multiple parties had also raised questions with Barings about the unusual cash transfers to Singapore. SIMEX itself sent written queries to London about the legitimacy of certain positions. A senior accountant reportedly raised concerns internally in late 1994. In each case, Leeson's explanation, that the funds represented client obligations, was accepted without independent verification, because he had always been right before, because the numbers he showed them were good, because checking would have implied distrust of a man they had publicly celebrated. This is the lesson Barings teaches, not about rogue traders but about institutional arrogance. When an organization mistakes profit for proof of integrity, it stops asking the questions that protect it. The controls that Barings skipped were not exotic or expensive. They were standard. Separation of duties, independent verification, escalation protocols, basic architecture. The bank that had survived Napoleon did not have a system to verify whether its Singapore office had actual clients. Every organization that has ever said, "We trust our people," as a substitute for oversight has written itself a version of this story. The only variable is the scale of the ending. Barings' ending was $1.3 billion and £1. The pound, at least, was real. If you want to understand how Deutsche Bank turned a decade of scandal into a masterclass in surviving everything, including itself, that story is next. Subscribe for more hidden empires.